So another thing I want to apologise for in advance is when I am excited and nervous, I speak very, very quickly. And I am both of those at the moment. So if you can't understand me, just, I don't know, fall asleep or something, whatever. Or throw something, I don't know. So anyway, yeah, you're here for my talk, Quality Not Quantity. I don't have a nice crazy intro because I only agreed to do this talk 2 weeks ago. There was another one tomorrow, which I'm also excited about. But anyway, here's Quality Not Quantity. So I want to start with why I like arriving, coming to these conferences is because I love hearing other people's stories. People talk about what they've done, particularly in software testing, the mistakes they've made, what they've learned from them. And this is what I'm doing here. I'm going to talk about some of the mistakes I've made, how I've learned from them, and how I learned from those mistakes helped me develop some really pretty good, awesome stuff with test automation. So here we go, quality, not quantity. What I'm going to mostly talk about is just mostly why do we need automation? You need to think about that very quickly. And also, not just that, is it actually necessary for your project? You need to answer the question first, because if you can't, if you don't know why you're doing automation when you're testing, then you're very unlikely to get value. And if there's no value, the business is not going to continue supporting it, which means no more automation. Which, secretly, the reason I do automation is because I find it fun. And if I can't do automation, then that makes me very sad. So, here we go. Obviously, there has to be a reason why you want automation. There has to be some value to the business. And some people think there's usually something that the business expects from automation. And it isn't usually anything that is feasible or realistic. They think that we can automate all tests. We can find all the bugs. And we won't need to hire any more testers. I'm quite glad that the last one isn't a realistic thing. Unfortunately, though, what does happen when those expectations are not met? The business then starts thinking, well, why did we spend all that money on it? What value did we get from that? So the really important thing is you need to actually prove that business value. So I'm going to talk about my first automation project. It did not go well. But again, like I said, people should be talking about their mistakes and how they learned from them, so other people can also learn from them. So some of the issues, lack of experience, that was a real big thing. My first automation project, it was literally a case of, my manager came to me and said, we want to do test automation. I thought, great, I really want to do that. Didn't think why, I just really wanted to try it out. I probably only been working in software testing for about a year at this point. And as a result, I hadn't actually done any coding for about a year either since I graduated from university. So, you know, I was like, "Ooh, okay, but that's okay. I can do this. I'll give it a go." So there was issues there. Again, what he said, but literally, my boss came to me and said, "We want to do automation." That was it. That was the end of the conversation. And I went, "Okay, let's go." We didn't actually discuss what we wanted to achieve. And if you don't know what you want to achieve from it, it's not going to go well. Also, we didn't assess the feasibility of automating each test. I literally, in my inexperience and naivety, I went, let's automate test 1, and then test 2, and then test 3. Oh, that took a bit longer than usual. It took me ages to automate that test, and suddenly test 4 came along, and it just really holds up your time if you try and do that. And obviously, I didn't take into account potential maintenance of tests. It's not just a case of automating it, and that's it. There is going to be future maintenance, especially if you're working on software that's changing, and if you're working on software that's not changing, you're probably not going to be testing it, so it's going to be changing. So, you know, there is going to be some maintenance, so you need to think about all these things, and I didn't, and it went really badly. I see someone taking a picture of my mistakes. Hi. So, again, I'll come back to what automation is like. This was said by Bas Dijkstra. He was at UK Star in London, that was earlier this year. And he compared test automation to bubble wrap. It is fun to play with. It is really fun to play with. It offers the extra layer of security. But if you don't use it correctly, it won't add much value to it. You know, there's some things that bubble wrap won't help. Like if you were planning on dropping something wrapped in bubble wrap, it's still probably going to break. There's also a thing like, do you actually need the bubble wrap? If you are, will there be any value in me wrapping bubble wrap around this bottle of water if I'm only going to drop it from this distance? Yeah. I won't drop it, don't worry, I'm sure the floor will be fine, just in case. So the real thing is, it's important to understand why we need automation. If we don't understand why we want it, we won't be able to use it correctly, and therefore you won't get any value from it. So that is very important. So one thing I started looking at is so when I started my new job and my new project, I then actually had decided to have a think about what did I want to achieve from it. So I recently came across this thing a few years ago. I said recently, sorry, it was a few years ago. Double diamond design process. It's something that was introduced by the British Design Council in 2005, and it introduces four phases to designing something. And the idea is, the reason I chose to use this model is because I was trying to use automation to solve a problem. I was trying to identify a problem. So first, you need to identify the problem. You need to design the thing right. You need to make sure you're designing the right thing before you're designing the thing right. I want to automate the right thing before automating it right. The four phases are, the first one is discover. So you get an insight into the problem. You just look at it and go, okay, these are the issues we've got. You get a nice big list of issues. The reason that there's two diamonds is because of the shape of it. So obviously the first step of the diamond, where it's now opening up, that's where you're getting a big list of issues that you might have. You then define, you choose an area to focus on. So you get that big list and you condense that into a single problem definition. And that's the one you're focusing on. The next one is develop. So from that problem, you then identify lots and lots of solutions, possible solutions. And then you hone in on that single final solution that will solve all your problems, or at least that one problem you find. So for this is how I'm going to go through how I use this model to identify which tests I wanted to automate. I'm going to give you a bit of context. It's a previous company. I've just started a new job. I've only been at my current job a month, but it was the previous company I used to work at. We developed scientific instruments, and I was testing the software that designed those, that ran those scientific instruments. We had quite a few issues. Meant testing took a really long time, mainly because, particularly end-to-end tests, mainly because we were running measurements on these instruments that sometimes could take anything from 10 minutes to several days. You could have, if you weren't careful, you could have a test that could last several days, a single test. So try to avoid that. It's not fun watching them run. So first step, I discovered all the issues. One of the issues we had was hardware availability. Because I had to run the software on instruments and we only had a finite amount of instruments, we didn't always have one available. Other departments needed them sometimes. I didn't just work with software, I also worked with mechanics, mechanical engineers, electronic engineers, firmware engineers, manufacturers, all sorts. Sometimes they wanted to borrow an instrument just for a demo to a client, and then they just never bring it back, which was very nice of them. Again, I mentioned length of time to run tests, anything from 10 minutes to several days. I tried to optimize tests so they wouldn't last as that several days. So most of them would only last about, at most, an hour or so. But that still was a long time for just one test. And obviously, because of all these tests we were running that were taking a ridiculous amount of time to run, we had a very long release cycle. We're probably only able to release maybe every 6 months. And also, because of these long time, I did not want to sit watching the software run for an hour when I could be doing something much more interesting. So observing software running was very difficult. I just basically got bored and would miss things out and like, oh, it's done it now. Oh, bugger. And then obviously, because of all these tests we had to run, it took a very long time to generate data, which we needed for some tests. So I'd be like, okay, I need this set of data. Okay, set up the test. I have to wait 20 minutes for it to run, and then I could run the test. So even the ones that didn't involve running long measurements still took a long time to run. And we had a lot of intermittent bugs. Sometimes it was caused by the hardware itself. And obviously, normally, they would come, when an issue was reported, they'd first go to software. They'd blame software first. Then we'd say, no, it's not us. It's one of the other departments. So if there was an intermittent issue, I was usually the one investigating it, and that would involve running lots and lots and lots of tests to try and get more information about this issue. And again, repetitive, precise, mundane tasks, a bit like observing software running. It's like watching paint dry, pretty boring. So these are all the issues that we had, and I then reduced that into one single definition. Reduce time to run through the regression test suite, and take advantage of overnight instrument availability. So basically, we solved the majority of those issues. We were able to, once we wanted to run through the regression test a lot quicker, so we could have more release cycle, we could have more releases more often. We wanted to make use of the instruments a lot of the time that are only available at night time, because most people don't work at night time. So be able to run those, maybe be able to make full use of that equipment would be very beneficial as well. And just just make things, just run more tests. So as I said, we've now completed the first diamond in the double diamond design process. We've discovered all our issues and we've honed in on a single problem. Now we are going to think about what solution we're going to develop from this. Now it doesn't have to be automation. We also want to also look at other solutions that might solve it other than automation. We did eventually carry on with automation. I am so sorry, I just want a bit of water a moment. So yeah, we did eventually stick with automation. I think that was kind of our plan from the start. I was pretty much given the similar brief this time, was we want to add automation. So, but this time I wanted to work. I actually wanted to have a reason why we're doing it, something to focus on. So I then went to work out how best to, I now had an area to focus the automation on. So solutions, we obviously did discuss if automation was the best solution. We investigated good test tools to use. One thing we did think about was we wanted to encourage other teams to also invest in test automation. My team was the first one to try it out, so we chose Ranorex mainly because we wanted it's quite an easy one to use, even from experienced and inexperienced testers. So both were able to try it out, be able to encourage everyone in the team to try it out. I then looked at what test cases to automate, which ones would be best to do, which ones would actually solve the problem that I defined. And also I assessed the feasibility of actually automating these test cases. This is the test I wanted to automate. Is it possible? Sometimes not. So I also look at how to do that. And then obviously once I then looked at that, I then focused on those tests that I'd chosen, the tool I'd chosen to use, and I used that to develop and run those tests. Sounds so simple, doesn't it, when you put it on there? Now, here's the big problem. This is what I went to my boss with after 6 months. After 6 months' work, I'd successfully automated a grand total of 10! You're laughing at me, I don't blame you. I remember the look of disappointment on his face when I said that. Again, it's like those expectations not being met. Yeah, that's nowhere near the expectations that he was expecting. I think even he had a reasonable idea of what I could achieve from it, and it was a bit more than that. But the problem is, those 10 tests weren't a complete waste of time. There was still value gained from those 10 tests I'd automated. There was still value. I just had to prove that to him. It's also a lot of things to bear in mind there. I wasn't just working on test automation. I was the only tester on the team, so I was the only person working on those tests. I was also doing the work with manual testing, exploratory testing as well, and generally just helping out with the team as well, and just other work as well. So it wasn't just 6 months of pure test automation development. There were other things I was doing during that time. So first thing you've got to make sure is they're aware of that you are bringing value to the team in other ways as well as through the automation. So obviously the saying big for others, I also wanted to prove business value from that work I'd done. I didn't want them to come to me and say, okay, we're not getting any value from this, so I don't want you to be working on this anymore. I would have been very disappointed if that happened, because like I said, I love working in test automation. I wanted to continue it working, but obviously the business doesn't pay me to have fun. I wish it did, but it doesn't. They pay me to actually work and bring some value to the company. If I have fun doing that, that's a bonus. So I had to look at what value are those tests bringing in. So there are several metrics you can look at. Obviously, test automated is the obvious one. but it's not very good if that number is very low for whatever reason. You can also look at bugs found. Now, I always find this quite a dangerous metric to use. Sometimes, especially since I find test automation doesn't usually find bugs. Usually it just verifies that it's working as it was before. If it fails, you have to then do additional testing yourself to find out what the reason was for that failure. So even if it does find an issue, it's not usually through test automation alone that finds that issue. And then, even then, so sometimes you can also look at the combination of manual tests and the combination of bugs found through manual testing and test automation. By running automating some tests, you have more time for manual testing, so that might find an increase in bugs found. Of course, there's also the issue where it depends what points you are in the release lifecycle. Before release, you should be finding fewer bugs than maybe during development, where more are being introduced. So you want to be careful of that metric, but it may be a good one to use, just if you can tell the story correctly with it. New information. Now, bugs found isn't the only information you're going to get from automated tests, from any sort of testing. You may actually also get the information like what actually have you found. You've confirmed things are working as well as what's not working. So that is also another good one to use, saying I've been able to test all this. This is automated, this is manual, and this is the extra stuff of manual tests I've been able to run because of the automated tests. And that's bringing a lot more information about the state of the software. So that's another good one to use. Test run, you're running more tests and then you're running more manual tests. I'm running these automated tests almost every night now, so that means that's a lot more testing. That's like 10 more tests every night I'm running now, so there's also that. Test coverage. So again, you've been new information as well. You've been able to get more information about this software. You might cover more areas of the application. So that's another good one to use. And time saved. And this is the one I used, mainly because my problem definition involved trying to save time, make use of overnight measurements, make more use of that time when the instruments aren't being used. So this one is the one I used, and this is how I proved it. So I took all my tests, I put them into groups based on estimated time it took to run tests, so 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes and 60 minutes. And showed how many tests were, time to run those tests manually, and then of course how many of those tests have been automated. All 10 of those tests were in group 4. They saved 60 minutes a test. So total estimated time, it was run manually, 4,110 minutes, or 68 hours, or 14 days. It took about 3 weeks to run through the regression tests. And time saved from running the automated tests, 600 minutes. So that's 2 days' work that I managed to save from those automated tests. So when I then say to my manager, okay, I've automated 10 tests, yeah, but it is saving 2 days of work when we do regression tests. 2 whole days, and suddenly this is sounding a bit more impressive. In total, that is 14.6% of our time saved. So when you then look at that more positive that way, by telling that story a different way, suddenly he's seeing the value in a lot more positive light. I've been able to prove that business value to him, that actually we have saved time. We've shaved 2 days off the regression test cycle. That can be increased, and we'll be able to eventually be able to get it down to a lot smaller amount. And obviously there were other benefits that I wanted to show him as well, not just the time saved. I mentioned that some tests required data to be run, data to be gathered before actually running that test. So you have to run the measurement and then run the test with the data. I didn't actually include that in my actual metrics there. So I would run the test and have that data for the next day, and I could just run the test just like that. Ability to run to check for intermittent errors by running lots of tests. So I designed some really, really basic tests that could be easily edited as required, and it meant I was able to run that a lot more times. So several times. A 15-minute measurement, that's 4 an hour. Run it overnight. How much time? I don't know. 12 hours time. That's I can't remember. I can't do maths. 48 tests run overnight potentially. And so we're able to get a lot more information from that, like about intermittent bugs, like saying, okay, this is happening once every 5 tests, every measurements, might be a big issue. And also we got all the logging information, which we're then able to help find the issue a bit lot better then. And okay, and detailed log of events while running the tests. So I mentioned we had logging from running the measurements, but also we had like actually a visual representation in my test report of what had happened during that measurement. I mentioned I did not like watching the measurement running, very boring. I'd rather be doing other things during that time, and also my attention span not good enough. No, I don't think anyone's is, to be honest, to be just staring, watching things happen on the screen while doing nothing for like a couple of hours. So I suddenly had this log of events. So when something did happen, particularly the intermittent ones, I would say, okay, so the failure is happening at this point in the measurement, after the focus or after this. So then you're able to find that information a lot easier, which you wouldn't be able to do while running manually. If you weren't there when that error happened, you wouldn't know what was happening. So the real thing is, by proving business value, I meant I was able to continue my work on automation. The fact is, no proving business value, no automation, and I really wanted to work on automation, so had to do it. And it was a success. They were very pleased and they supported it, and I continued working on it. I was working it for the full 3 years I was working there. And it's still being used now as well. So I know that I carried on. The next person who was taking my job, she's continuing very well as well, and she still messaged me saying, "I'm so glad I got those tests. They're so helpful." So just the current state of the tests. Over 2 years, that was over 2 years of development. That's when I wrote this slide. Needs updating. Regression tests automated. I had 37 out of 181. That's 20% of the test automated, but the time saved was 42%. So we were able to get it down by almost half. And obviously that doesn't take into account the time saved from the tests that required data to be run them as well. So it meant we've saved a lot of time. I also selected set up a test suite that was automated smoke tests that were run daily or weekly. So I was a few tests that were run overnight, and then a few more tests that run weekly, and we were able to find issues a lot earlier on if they came about. Again, partially automated tests. So there's some tests that I hadn't yet managed to automate some of the verification steps at the end. I mentioned not all tests can be feasibly automated. Some of these couldn't be, not all of it could be feasibly automated, but I was able to at least run the start of the test. Things were saved to a file or saved on there, and I was able to then look manually, check, yep, good, that happened, test passed. And then of course one-off repeatable tests that I could run, just investigate intermittent bugs with. So the real story is, before starting an automated test project, really have to think about what you want to achieve from it. If you don't know what you want to achieve from it, you're very unlikely to get any value from it, which means that the business are then going to say, why we spent this money? They're going to start asking questions, and then they'll say no automation. So you need to really show what the benefit is to the business. The real thing is, don't automate for the sake of it. Please don't. I know it's fun, but don't automate for the sake of it. You need to really look at what is wrong with your current test strategy. What improvements do you need to make? Some of those improvements may not need automation. Some of them might. But then you can actually really focus on setting up that test automation correctly and in a way that will actually be useful to your team and to your business. And again, it's very important to demonstrate the value gained from the automated tests so that the business will continue to support it, because without that support you will not be able to work with test automation. And I like doing it for fun, but I do believe that it can be a very useful tool to use as part of your test strategy. So I think it's very important that you really make it work. Just do the right things. Make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. I think that's very important. So just a bit about me. I didn't put a slide about me but just so if you have any questions, I have a blog. I have Twitter. I have a Twitter handle at Louise_J_Gibbs. Really? Sorry, I talk too fast. So yeah, at Louise _J _ Gibbs. I'm very imaginative with my Twitter handle. I only use that one for testing, test related stuff. I don't really use Twitter socially. So if you have any questions, message me on there. Or I'm also on LinkedIn. I put the picture of me on there, not because I like the way I look. I do, but that's not the reason. But just so that's the picture I use on LinkedIn, so you can find me easily. If you want a bit more further information, there is a great webinar by Angie Jones on which tests should we automate. She talks about using a matrix to try and work out which tests are best to automate. It's worth watching. If you just search Angie Jones, what tests to automate. I don't know if anyone of you have seen Angie Jones talk ever. She is an amazing speaker, very engaging. I do recommend watching that. And also, if you want to find out more about what Baz Dijkstra says about bubble wrap, you can also find it on his blog on test automation. It's literally titled "Why Test Automation is a Lot Like Bubble Wrap." It's a very nice one to read. Yeah. So apparently we had 15 minutes left. I'm so sorry that I didn't talk long enough. Or some of you might be pleased. I don't know. Your choice. Does anyone have any questions?